The champagne glass was still in his hand when he said it. We were standing in the middle of the ballroom, my father and I, surrounded by about 60 people from his firm. The chandelier above us was one of those big crystal ones that throws light like it's trying to convince you the evening matters. Waiters moved around with trays of something expensive. There was a string quartet in the corner playing that same song rich people always play when they want the room to feel important. My father had his hand on my shoulder. The kind of hand a man puts on his daughter when he wants everyone to see that he's a good father. Warm. Fatherly. Public. Then the managing partner walked over. Silver hair. Gold watch. One of those men who smiles with only the bottom half of his face. He asked my father who I was. And my father laughed. That practiced, room-warming laugh he has. The one that makes strangers believe him. He said, "Oh, this is my daughter Claire. She's the one who never finished college." The managing partner's smile went a little stiff. He recovered fast, the way men like him do, and said something polite about how that was fine, that degrees weren't everything. My father laughed again and said, "Well, we keep hoping. She's got a stubborn streak." Then he squeezed my shoulder like we were sharing a joke, and turned to talk about someone else's son who'd just made partner at a firm in Chicago. I stood there for maybe 4 seconds. 4 seconds where I could feel the heat rising up the back of my neck and the champagne glass going slippery in my hand. I didn't say anything. I didn't correct him. I smiled the way I've been smiling for 29 years. And then I put the glass down on the nearest tray, walked out through the lobby of the Bellamy Hotel, and drove home. He didn't notice I'd left for another 40 minutes. What he also didn't know, what he couldn't have known while he was laughing about his disappointing daughter in front of his partners, was that 11 days from that moment, the firm's HR department was going to call him into a conference room on the 18th floor. And the person sitting across the table from him was going to be the one he'd just humiliated. But I'll get to that. Let me tell you how we got there. My name is Claire. I'm 29 years old, and if you'd asked anyone in my father's circle about me 2 months ago, they would have told you I was the daughter who never amounted to much. The one who dropped out. The one who moved to the city and didn't really explain what she did. The quiet one. The one who, whenever my father was asked, got described in 3 or 4 words and then the subject was changed. My father is David Ellison. He's a senior partner at Ellison, Grant & Hayes, a mid-sized corporate law firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. 43 attorneys. A lot of money moving through it. The kind of firm where everyone's wife has a tennis bracelet and everyone's son is somewhere in the pipeline to take over. My father built his whole adult identity around that firm. He was the first in his family to go to law school, and he never let anyone forget it, least of all me. When I was 17, I got into Duke. He cried at the acceptance letter. Not because he was proud of me, I realized later, but because it was the school he'd wanted to go to and couldn't afford. I was going to be the version of him he didn't get to be. He told everyone at the firm about it. There was a dinner. He made a toast. He talked about legacy. I went to Duke for 3 semesters. In the middle of my sophomore year, my mother got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3 by the time they found it. My father flew into the kind of quiet rage that only men like him know how to do, where everything is clipped and polite and nothing actually gets dealt with. He worked longer hours. He hired a home health aide and told himself that was handling it. My sister Megan was 15 and still at home, and she stopped eating. I came home. I didn't ask him. I just drove back to Charlotte one Thursday and started making dinners and sitting with my mother during her chemo appointments and driving Megan to school in the mornings. I told my father I was taking a semester off. He said fine. He was at the office. A semester became 2. My mother died in the spring of my would-have-been junior year. She was 46. Megan was a wreck. My father went back to work 3 days after the funeral and started dating a woman named Rachel by the following fall. Rachel was a paralegal at his firm. She was 31. I was 21. I never went back to Duke. I kept meaning to. That's what I told myself for a long time. I was going to finish. I was going to re-enroll. But every time I tried to plan it, something else happened. Megan's senior year. Megan's college applications. Megan's freshman year meltdown where I drove 6 hours to pick her up from her dorm at 2 a.m. because she was having a panic attack and nobody else was going to do it. My father had married Rachel by then. They were on a cruise. Here's the thing my father never understood, and I mean this almost clinically, I wasn't sad that I hadn't finished college. I'd moved past it. I'd built a life. What I was sad about was that he never once asked me why. Not one time. Not at Thanksgiving, not at Christmas, not when I turned 25, not when I got my own apartment in Raleigh and started over. He just accepted, the way you accept a mild inconvenience, that his older daughter was a dropout. He folded it into his identity. She's the one who didn't finish. It became shorthand. It became the thing he said about me when people asked. I heard him say it at my cousin's wedding when I was 24. I heard him say it at a client dinner when I was 26. I heard him say it at his own 60th birthday party when I was 27, in front of his secretary and 2 of his partners and a woman from his country club who said, "Oh, that's a shame," and then looked at me like I was a sad little pet. I didn't correct him any of those times either. I don't know why. I think some part of me kept waiting for him to ask. To get curious. To say, "Claire, what are you actually doing with your life?" I think I wanted the question more than I wanted the answer to matter. He never asked. So he never found out. Here's what I did in the 7 years between leaving Duke and standing in that ballroom. I moved to Raleigh in 2019 with $1,100 in my checking account and a futon in the back of my car. I got a job as an administrative assistant at a firm called Harwood Consulting. It was boring work, mostly scheduling and document review, but I was good at it, and the woman I assisted, a senior consultant named Denise, noticed. Within a year she was sending me to meetings. Within 2 years I was writing client reports under her name because my drafts were cleaner than hers. She paid me $18 an hour to do work that billed out at $400. I didn't complain. I watched. I learned how the firm made money, how the partners talked to clients, how the junior consultants burned out by year 3 because they didn't understand that the work wasn't the work, the relationships were the work. In 2021, I took a night certification course in HR management. Not because I wanted to be in HR, but because Denise suggested it, and I trusted her. It turned out I was exceptional at it. The kind of exceptional where instructors email you after class and ask if you've considered a career in this. I got the certification in 8 months. I got a second one, in executive compensation, the year after. In early 2023, a recruiter found me on LinkedIn. She was putting together candidates for an HR director position at a law firm in Charlotte. Mid-sized. 40-plus attorneys. Recently acquired by a larger parent company and going through a compliance overhaul. She said my profile was unusual but impressive and would I be open to a conversation. I said yes. I didn't tell her the firm was my father's firm. I didn't know it yet. She hadn't named it. 3 weeks later, she told me. Ellison, Grant, and Hayes. I sat on my couch in my apartment in Raleigh and stared at the name on my laptop screen for about 10 minutes. Then I called the recruiter back and asked her what the interview process looked like. Here's what I want you to understand about that moment, because I think it matters. I didn't take the interview to get revenge on my father. I want to be clear about that, because I've thought about it a lot since. I took the interview because it was a $40,000 raise and a director-level title, and it was the logical next step in the career I'd spent 7 years building. The fact that it happened to be his firm was a coincidence. A dark, funny, unbelievable coincidence. But also, I'm not going to lie to you. When the recruiter said the name, something in my chest went very still and very quiet. The way it goes still right before you finally tell somebody the truth. I went through 4 rounds of interviews. I spoke to the COO, to the managing partner, to 2 senior partners, and to the head of the parent company's HR compliance team. None of them were my father. My father was not on the HR oversight committee. He was a senior partner in the corporate transactions group, and HR reporting went through a completely different chain. I used my middle name professionally. Claire Sutton. Sutton is my mother's maiden name. I've used it on LinkedIn and in every professional context since I was 22. My father's last name was never on my business cards. It wasn't because I was hiding. It was because after my mother died, I wanted something of hers that was still mine. I started signing work emails with Sutton, and it stuck. The firm made me an offer in August. $142,000, plus bonus, plus relocation. Director of Human Resources and Compliance, reporting to the COO. Start date, October 14th. I accepted. My father didn't know. My sister Megan knew. Megan lived in Asheville by then, a social worker, 25 years old, and the only person in my family who understood what my actual life was. I told her the week I got the offer. She laughed so hard she had to put the phone down for a minute. When she picked it back up she said, Claire, you're going to be his HR director. I said, technically I'm going to be the firm's HR director. She said, you know what I mean. I told her I wasn't going to say anything. I wasn't going to walk into his office on my first day and announce myself. I wasn't going to make it a thing. I was going to do my job. Corporate policy at the firm was actually pretty clear about family relationships, but the policy was about direct reporting lines, and my father didn't report to me, and I didn't report to him. There was a disclosure form. I filled it out on my first day. I disclosed the relationship in writing to the COO and to the parent company's compliance officer. Both of them were fine with it. They asked if I had any concerns about objectivity. I said no. They asked if my father knew. I said he didn't, and I'd prefer to keep it that way for as long as professionally possible. They thought that was unusual. They were lawyers. They didn't push. I started on October 14th. I had a corner office on the 15th floor. My father's office was on the 22nd. I'd been there 6 weeks and we hadn't crossed paths once. The firm is big enough that you don't see senior partners from other practice groups unless you're specifically in a meeting with them. I kept my head down. I was good at my job. I made it through Thanksgiving and into the first week of December without him having any idea I was in the building. And then he invited me to the firm's annual client gala. He didn't know he was inviting me. He invited his daughter Claire, who was, in his mind, a girl who worked some vague administrative job in Raleigh and who sometimes came home for Christmas. He called me on a Wednesday night in early December and said Rachel had suggested I come. He said it in a way that made it clear Rachel had suggested it and he was following through. He said it would be nice for people to see me. I said yes before I'd really thought about it. I think I said yes because some stupid small part of me wondered if this time would be different. If this time he'd be proud. If he'd introduce me to people and not say the thing. I'd been promoted to a director role at a major firm. I'd built a career from nothing. I wasn't a dropout anymore, I was just someone who hadn't finished one specific degree, and anyway I was thinking about going back part-time the next fall because I could afford it now. I thought, maybe he'll ask. Maybe if I go, and I stand there in the room with him, and he introduces me to people, he'll get curious. He'll say, Claire, what are you doing these days? And I'll be able to say it. I'll be able to finally say it. I drove to Charlotte on the Friday of the gala. I got to the hotel at 6. Rachel hugged me in the lobby. She was wearing a dress that cost about $3,000 and she smelled like a perfume counter. She told me I looked lovely. She asked about my little job, which was her way of being nice. Rachel isn't a bad person, I want to say that. She's shallow but she's not cruel. She's the kind of woman who thinks she's being supportive when she's actually just being incurious. My father came over a few minutes later. He was already 2 glasses in. He kissed the top of my head and said, "Glad you made it, kiddo." He didn't ask how I was. He scanned the room over my shoulder while he was talking to me. I watched his eyes moving. He was looking for the managing partner. The managing partner, I already knew, was a man named Gerald Hoffman. I'd had a one-on-one meeting with him my 2nd week on the job. He was the one who'd approved my hiring. He was also the one walking toward us right now, with his wife, smiling at my father, extending his hand. I had about 10 seconds to decide what to do. I could have said something. I could have spoken first. I could have smiled at Gerald and said, "Hi, good to see you again." I could have let my father watch his boss greet his daughter like they knew each other. I didn't. I froze. Some old instinct from being 11 years old at my father's work parties kicked in, and I stepped back half a step and let my father take the lead. He didn't see the half step. He didn't notice Gerald's very small pause when Gerald saw my face. I saw the pause. Gerald was trying to figure out if he was supposed to know me from the firm. He couldn't place me in the context of a gala. I could see him deciding whether to say something. He didn't. He's a professional. He waited. And that's when my father put his hand on my shoulder, and laughed his warm room laugh, and said the sentence he had been saying about me for 7 years. "Oh, this is my daughter Claire. She's the one who never finished college." Gerald's face did something I'm not going to forget. It went through 3 expressions in about 1.5 seconds. First confusion. Then recognition. Then something that was almost, but not quite, concealed disgust. Not at me. At my father. His wife, who had no idea who anyone was, said something polite. Gerald recovered. He said the thing about degrees not being everything. My father laughed and said the thing about hoping. And then Gerald looked at me, directly, for just a second, and I saw him register that I wasn't going to say anything. That I was just going to stand there. He gave me the smallest nod. Then he moved on. My father didn't notice any of it. He was already turning to talk about his friend's son in Chicago. I put the champagne glass down. I walked out. I got in my car in the parking garage and sat there for a while with my hands on the steering wheel, and I thought about what I was going to do on Monday morning. I sat in that parking garage for about 20 minutes. I'm going to be honest with you about what I was thinking, because if I tell it the way I wanted to feel it, I'd be lying. I wasn't plotting anything. I wasn't making a list. I wasn't going to walk into HR on Monday and file a complaint against my own father. I knew I wasn't going to do any of that, because I'd spent 7 years not doing any of that, and whatever was broken in me that kept me quiet at my cousin's wedding and at his 60th birthday was still broken enough to keep me quiet now. What I was actually thinking was smaller and sadder than revenge. I was thinking, I have to go back in there. Rachel knows I left my coat at coat check. My father will notice eventually. If I just leave, there will be a scene on Sunday, a phone call where Rachel asks me what's wrong and my father gets on the line and says I embarrassed him by disappearing. I was running the math on which version of the evening was going to cost me less. That's the part one don't want to gloss over. For 20 minutes in that garage, I was still doing the thing. I was still managing him. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Gerald Hoffman. "Claire. I noticed you left. I hope everything is okay. If you're still in the building, I'd appreciate a moment." I read it twice. I actually looked up at the concrete ceiling of the garage and laughed, just once, this short dry laugh, because of course. Of course the managing partner of the firm had noticed, and of course he was the kind of man who texted directly instead of sending it through 3 people. I texted back that I was in the parking garage and I could come back up. He wrote, "The bar on the mezzanine. Give me 5 minutes." I went back inside. I took the elevator to the mezzanine. The bar up there was quieter than the main ballroom, a few partners and their spouses at small tables, a pianist in the corner playing something I didn't recognize. Gerald was already at a corner table with 2 glasses of water. He stood when I walked over. He pulled out the chair for me, which is the kind of small thing I noticed because my father had never done it. He didn't make small talk. He said, "I'm not going to ask if you're all right, because I'd be insulting you. I want to ask you something else, and I want you to answer honestly." I said okay. He said, "Does your father know you work for us?" I said no. He said, "How long?" I said, "Since October 14th. He was quiet for a second. He turned his water glass on the table. Then he said, "That's close to 2 months. I said, "I disclosed the relationship on my first day. The COO and compliance both signed off. I can send you the paperwork Monday morning." He waved that off. He said, "I know about the disclosure." I signed the acknowledgement. "I'm asking a different question. Why didn't you tell him?" I didn't have a rehearsed answer. What I said was the truth. I said, "Because I didn't want him to be nice to me because of the job. I wanted to see if he'd get curious on his own." Gerald looked at me for a long moment. He's 64 years old. He has very steady gray eyes and a way of going silent that makes the other person fill the space, which I'm sure is worth about $1,000 an hour to his clients. I didn't fill the space. I've been doing HR long enough to know that trick. I just held his gaze and waited. He said, "I've been in this industry for 40 years. I have to tell you, tonight is one of the worst things I've ever watched a partner do to their own child in public, and I've watched a lot." I said, "He wasn't trying to be cruel. That's just what he thinks of me." Gerald said, "That's worse." I didn't answer that. I couldn't answer that. He said, "Claire, I'm going to say something and I want you to understand I'm saying it as the managing partner of the firm, not as a friend. What happened tonight is not a family matter from where I'm sitting. Your father is a senior partner. You are a director-level employee. He made a statement about you, in front of me and my wife and roughly 40 of our clients, that was objectively untrue and was designed to diminish a member of firm leadership. I don't care that he didn't know you were in firm leadership. I care that he said it. And I care about the pattern it suggests, because if he's willing to say something like that about his own daughter at a firm event, I have to ask what he's saying about associates and paralegals when I'm not in the room." I didn't know what to say. So I said what I actually felt, which was, "I don't want this to turn into a thing." Gerald said, "I understand. But this is going to be a thing, Claire. It has to be. Not because of tonight. Because of what tonight tells me about other nights." He paused. Then he said, "I'd like you to come to a meeting on Monday afternoon. HR compliance, myself, and Beverly from the parent company. We're going to have a conversation about your father. You don't have to run the meeting. You don't have to be the complainant. But I want you there, because you know him better than anyone in that room." I said, "He's going to know." Gerald said, "Yes. Eventually he will." I sat there with my hand around a glass of water I hadn't touched, and I thought about 7 years of silences. I thought about my cousin's wedding. I thought about the country club woman who looked at me like a sad pet. I thought about the way my father had squeezed my shoulder in the ballroom like we were in on a joke together. I said, "Okay." Gerald said, "Good. Go home. Tell your father whatever you need to tell him about leaving the gala. Don't mention me. I'll handle Monday." I stood up. He stood up. Before I walked away, he said one more thing. He said, "For what it's worth, Claire, you've been doing extraordinary work. Beverly mentioned your name in a board call last week. I should have told you that sooner. I'm telling you now." I nodded. I couldn't talk. I walked to the elevator. I got in my car. I drove back to my apartment in Raleigh, the whole 2.5 hours, and I did not cry until I got into my own driveway. Then I sat in the car and cried for probably 15 minutes with the engine off. Not hard. Just steadily. The way you cry when something has been sitting in your chest for a very long time and has finally found a door. I went inside. I poured a glass of wine. I called Megan. She picked up on the second ring. I told her everything. The ballroom, Gerald, the mezzanine bar, the meeting on Monday. I told her I'd said yes. There was a long pause on her end. Then she said, "Claire." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I love you. And I think you're doing the right thing. And I also want you to know, whatever happens Monday, I'm on your side. Dad's been doing this your whole life. He did it to me too, just differently. I'm the sensitive one, remember?" I laughed a little. I'd forgotten. He used to call her sensitive, which in his mouth was an insult. She said, "Don't let him make you feel like the bad guy." I said, "I'll try." She said, "No. Don't try. Just don't. He's going to call you and cry and say you're tearing the family apart, and I need you to remember that he tore it apart a long time ago. You're just the one finally saying it out loud." I hung up. I went to bed. I didn't sleep much. The weekend was the longest weekend of my life, and also, somehow, the quietest. I didn't do anything. That's what I mean by quiet. I think people imagine that when you're about to do something big, you're busy. You're rehearsing. You're making plans. I wasn't. I sat in my apartment. I did laundry. I cleaned my bathroom. I made a pot of soup on Saturday and ate it for 2 days. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't answer any calls. My father called on Saturday morning. I let it ring. He left a voicemail I didn't listen to. Rachel texted in the afternoon asking if I was okay, if I'd left the gala because I felt sick. I wrote back that I'd had a migraine and didn't want to make a scene. She said, "Oh honey, so sorry, let's do brunch next time you're in town." I said that sounded nice. That was the extent of my management of him for the entire weekend. Here's what I noticed, sitting on my couch on Sunday afternoon with a book I wasn't really reading. I noticed that for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't waiting for him to ask. I wasn't running any loops in my head about what I'd say if he got curious. I wasn't rehearsing the version of my career I'd give him if he finally sat down and wanted to hear it. The whole internal machine that had been running in the background of my life, the machine that was always slightly tuned to him, had gone quiet. I didn't feel powerful. I want to be honest about that. I felt tired. I felt the kind of tired that sits on your shoulders and doesn't lift when you stand up. But under the tired there was something else, something I didn't have a word for yet. A kind of stillness. The stillness of not needing anything from him anymore. I also did one small thing on Sunday night that I want to tell you about, because I've thought about it a lot since. I opened my laptop. I went into my email. And I archived every single email I had from my father. Every one. Going back to 2019. Birthday emails, forwarded articles, one-line messages about Megan, a long email he sent me when my mother died that I had read exactly once. I didn't delete them. I archived them. I put them in a folder called Dad. I closed the laptop. It was a small thing. I'm not even sure why I did it. But when I put my laptop on the coffee table, my apartment felt different. Lighter. Like I'd taken a box I didn't know I'd been carrying and set it down. I went to bed early. I slept better than I had in months. Monday morning, I went to the office like it was a normal day. I wore the suit I always wear, gray, professional, not expensive but well cut. I got coffee from the place across the street. I took the elevator to the 15th floor. I answered emails. I had a 9:30 meeting with a benefits administrator about the new health plan. I had an 11 o'clock call about a compliance audit. I ate lunch at my desk. A yogurt and an apple. At 1:40 in the afternoon, Beverly from the parent company walked into my office without knocking. Beverly is in her 50s, a black woman with short silver hair who has been doing corporate HR compliance for 30 years and who does not, under any circumstances, waste time. She closed my door behind her. She said, "You ready?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Gerald briefed me. I've also pulled some things of my own. Before we go up there, I need you to know what's on the table." I nodded. She said, "Your father has had 3 informal complaints filed against him in the last 14 months. None of them escalated. One was a paralegal who said he made a comment about her weight at a client dinner. One was an associate who said he told her in a meeting that she should smile more if she wants to make partner. One was a summary from the parent company's exit interview process, an associate who left last April, who specifically named him as a reason for leaving. She said he referred to her in front of clients as the diversity hire. Those words, in quotes, are in the exit interview transcript. I didn't say anything. I was processing. Beverly said, "None of these on their own rose to a termination level." Conversation. "But I want you to understand the context for what's going to happen upstairs. What happened Friday night to you is not a standalone incident. It's a 4th data point. And now that we know he's capable of saying something like that about his own daughter in front of the managing partner, we have to revisit the pattern." I said, "He doesn't know those complaints exist." Beverly said, "He doesn't. They were handled informally, which is firm policy for complaints below a certain threshold. That's going to be one of the things we discuss in the meeting, actually. Whether that threshold is appropriate." I said, "He's going to think I did this." Beverly looked at me. She said, "Claire, I want you to hear this. You did not do this. He did this. You are one piece of evidence. You are not the cause." She paused. Then she said, "You also don't have to come to the meeting. Gerald wants you there. I want you there. But if you're not ready, you can say no, and we will handle it without you." I thought about it for about 4 seconds. I said, "I'll come." She said, "Good." We took the elevator to the 18th floor. The HR conference room is at the end of a hallway with frosted glass walls. Gerald was already inside. So was the firm's general counsel, a woman named Patricia, and the firm's COO, a man named Miles. I had worked with all of them. None of them looked surprised to see me. Patricia had a folder in front of her. Gerald had another folder. Beverly had a laptop. Gerald said, "Let's get him up here." Miles picked up the conference room phone and called upstairs. 3 minutes later, my father walked in. He didn't see me at first. He saw Gerald and Patricia and Miles, and he did the thing he does when he's trying to figure out what kind of meeting he's walked into. His jaw tightened. His shoulders went back. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from Gerald, put his hands flat on the table, and said, "What's this about?" Then Beverly, who was sitting to my left, moved slightly, and he saw me. I want to tell you about his face, because I think it's important. The first expression was confusion. Pure, clean confusion, like his brain couldn't place me in the geography of the room. He looked at me, and then he looked at the conference room table, and then he looked at Patricia, and then he looked back at me. You could see him trying to reconcile it. The second expression, maybe a second later, was a kind of wariness. He still didn't understand, but he'd figured out that whatever this was, it wasn't good. The third expression, when Patricia slid a copy of my employment agreement across the table toward him, was the one I'm going to remember. He looked at the document. He read the name at the top. Claire Ellison Sutton, Director of Human Resources and Compliance, hire date October 14th. He looked up at me. He said, "Since when?" He didn't say it as a question. He said it as a statement. Flat. Accusatory. Like I had been caught. Gerald said, "David, your daughter has been employed by this firm for almost 2 months. The relationship was disclosed by her to compliance on her first day, per firm policy. She did not, however, disclose it to you. Which, given what happened at the gala on Friday night, I now understand. My father's face went from pale to red very fast. He looked at Gerald. He said, "Gerald, whatever you think you saw on Friday, that was a family matter. That was me teasing my kid. That's not a firm issue." Gerald said, "David, you introduced a senior member of firm management to me and 40 of our clients as, and I'm quoting you here, the one who never finished college. You said it in a tone that was clearly dismissive. You did so without checking what she actually does for a living, which you have had 7 years to ask. I understand family dynamics can be complicated. What I am telling you, as the managing partner, is that the way you spoke about her is not consistent with the standards of conduct we expect from senior partners at this firm, and it raises questions that go beyond Friday night." My father said, "This is insane. She's my daughter." Patricia said, "David, we're not having a family meeting. We're having a conduct meeting. I want to walk you through some history. There are 3 other matters on the table." She opened her folder. She started reading. I watched my father's face as she read. The paralegal. The associate. The exit interview. He didn't know about any of them. You could see each one land. The first one, he tried to argue. Patricia didn't let him. She just kept reading. The second one, he opened his mouth and closed it again. The third one, the exit interview, the diversity hire line, he went completely still. When Patricia finished, there was silence in the room. My father looked at me. He said, "Did you do this?" I said, "No." He said, "You had to have done this. None of this was on the record." Beverly said, "David, all of this was on the record. It was in informal complaint files you don't have access to. Claire has not seen any of this material either. She is seeing it for the first time in this meeting, same as you." My father looked at me again. I held his eyes. I didn't look away. This was, I realized, the first time in my entire adult life I had looked at my father directly in the eye and not tried to soften what was there. He looked away first. Gerald said, "David, we're going to take a recess. I want you to go back to your office. I want you to think about what's been presented here. We're going to reconvene tomorrow morning at 10 with your employment attorney present, if you choose to retain one. I strongly suggest you do." My father stood up. His chair scraped loud on the floor. He looked around the table. He looked at me. He looked like he was going to say something. He didn't. He walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Beverly exhaled. Patricia closed her folder. Miles looked at me and said, quietly, "Are you okay?" I said, "I don't know yet." Gerald said, "Claire, go home early today. Take tomorrow off if you need to. We'll handle the 10 o'clock meeting." I said, "I want to be there." Gerald said, "You don't have to be." I said, "I know. I want to be." He nodded. I walked back to my office. I closed the door. I sat down at my desk. I looked out the window at the parking garage, the same kind of parking garage I'd sat in 3 nights before, and I put my hands flat on the desk the way my father had put his hands flat on the conference table. Then my phone started ringing. It was him. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. He didn't say hello. He said, "Claire, you need to fix this." I said, "I can't fix this, Dad. I'm not the one who broke it." He said, "You know what I mean. Call Gerald. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him I was joking on Friday. You know how I am at those things. I have a drink and I run my mouth. You know that." I said, "Dad." He said, "Claire, this is my career. 31 years at this firm. You're going to let them push me out over a joke at a party?" I said, Dad, I need you to listen to me for a second. Can you do that? There was a pause. Then, grudgingly, go ahead. I said, I have been an HR director at your firm for 2 months. Before that, I was an HR manager at a consulting firm in Raleigh for 3 years. Before that, I was an executive assistant who wrote reports for senior consultants. I have 2 professional certifications. I make $142,000 a year. I'm probably going to start my MBA next fall. I was going to tell you all of that on Friday night. I was waiting for you to ask. He didn't say anything. I said, you didn't ask. You've never asked. For 7 years, you've told people I'm the one who never finished college, and you've never once wondered what I was actually doing instead. And I let you. That's on me. I kept showing up and letting you say it, because some part of me kept thinking if I waited long enough, you'd get curious. He said, Claire, I don't know what you want me to say. I said, I know. That's the problem. I don't think you do. He said, so what, this is revenge? You took the job to get back at me? I said, no, Dad. I took the job because it was a good job. You're not the reason I did this. You're just the reason it's a story. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, are you going to testify against me tomorrow? I said, I'm going to be in the room. I'm not going to lie for you. I'm also not going to lie about you. Whatever happens, happens. He said, I can't believe you do this to your family. I said, Dad. That line used to work on me. It doesn't anymore. I hung up. He didn't call back that night. He didn't call back the next morning either. The 10 o'clock meeting happened without him. His attorney came. My father stayed home. A week later, he resigned. The firm accepted the resignation. There was no press release, no dramatic exit. He was 60 years old and he had his pension and his share of the firm's equity, and everybody moved on. I stayed. Gerald promoted me in March to VP of HR and Compliance. Beverly told me over coffee that I'd been on the shortlist for it before any of this happened, which mattered to me. I wanted to know the job came from the work. Megan and I have brunch every other Sunday now. She drives down from Asheville. She's dating someone, a kind, quiet man who fixes her car when it breaks and asks her about her day. She's happy. I like him. My father and I don't speak. Rachel sent me a Christmas card the first year. She didn't the second. I don't know what he tells people about me now. I don't think about it much. That's the part one want to end on, because I think it's the part that matters. For 7 years, I was waiting for him to ask a question he was never going to ask. The freedom wasn't in the meeting, or the resignation, or even the moment he figured out who I was at that conference table. The freedom was the Sunday night before, on my couch, when I archived his emails and felt my apartment get quieter. I built my life without him. It turns out I'd been doing that the whole time. I just hadn't let myself notice. If you watched this far, you already know this story hit different. If you want more stories like this one, real ones, the kind people are afraid to tell, they're on your screen right now. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.